She sat on my couch twisting the ring I bought her, telling me she had feelings for another man. I didn't argue. Something inside me just locked into place. The living room was quiet enough that I could hear the soft click of the ring turning on her finger. Megan stood in front of me, arms folded tight across her chest, eyes red but steady, like she'd already rehearsed this speech in a mirror. She said she needed space, that she had feelings she needed to sort out. She didn't say his name, but she didn't have to. The tone said enough. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes said the rest. I waited for anger, heartbreak, something. But what came was colder, cleaner. A line in the sand I didn't see coming until the moment my foot crossed it. I set my house key on the counter with a quiet tap. Her eyes snapped up like she thought it was some kind of threat or gesture meant to jolt her. But I was calm. My hands weren't even shaking. "When you finally understand what you've lost," I said, meeting her stare straight on. "It'll be too late." Her mouth opened like she wanted to say my name. Soften the blow. Walk it back. I didn't wait for whatever half-measure she had coming. I walked to the bedroom, grabbed the suitcase I never fully unpacked from work trips, and filled it with clothes without thinking. She followed me down the hall, voice cracking. "Alex, can we talk about this? I just need time. I just need to figure things out." I zipped the bag shut. "You already made your decision. I'm making mine." Her silence was worse than shouting. It was the silence of someone who thought I'd argue, someone who thought I'd fight for her, someone who believed she had that kind of power. But I walked past her, past the couch where we'd planned our wedding dates, past the stack of venue brochures she never really looked at. When I stepped outside, the door clicked behind me like punctuation. Within 24 hours, I was airborne. Austin shrinking beneath the plane, Denver ahead, transfer paperwork approved before the ink dried. I didn't give her a speech. I didn't send a final text. I left her with the ring she kept twisting like it burned. That was the moment the story began. Not the years before, not the rise, not the slow shift from coworkers to lovers. The beginning was the ending. But to understand why that moment hit with such finality, you have to go back to when Megan Scott first walked into my life, January 2021, Meridian Technologies' 9th floor conference room. Back when I thought I'd met the one person who could match me stride for stride. Back when I still believed in something like permanence. We met at a time when everything in my life looked good on paper. Regional operations manager. Corner office. Salary that made my parents proud. A routine tight enough to look like discipline but hollow enough to feel like nothing. The kind of success that impresses everyone except the man living it. Then Megan arrived from Chicago, sharp, focused, walking into meetings like she owned them. She demanded excellence without blinking. She challenged ideas, challenged people, challenged me. And I liked it. I had no idea she'd end up challenging my entire understanding of loyalty. Back then, she wasn't twisting a ring or asking for space. She was fired in a company that had gone soft. She was motionless in a room that had been still for too long. She walked into my life and rewrote the tempo. And I let her. But all of that, the spark, the partnership, the rise and fall and rebuild, only makes sense when you realize one thing. A man doesn't break in the moment she says she has feelings for someone else. He breaks long before that, piece by piece. What happens in the living room is just the final crack. My story starts at the moment I finally feel the pieces stop falling and lock into something solid. The moment I chose myself. January 2021. Austin cold snaps feel like someone pretending to be winter, but the skyline still looked clean through the glass walls of Meridian Technologies headquarters. My office sat on the 12th floor, corner suite, new leather chair, 3 framed awards I didn't bother hanging. I'd been promoted to regional operations manager 2 months earlier. Everyone congratulated me like it was some grand milestone. But every morning I unlocked that office, turned on the lights, and felt nothing. The apartment I went home to was worse. Quiet, spotless, soulless. A place that looked like a showroom because I barely lived in it. Work, gym, sleep, repeat. I wasn't lonely, I was just unused, like a knife kept in a drawer. Then the executive meeting happened. Brandon Phillips, our CEO and a man who cared more about buzzwords than numbers, was droning about innovation pathways. I was half listening, half planning my week, when the door opened and she walked in. Megan Scott, marketing director from Chicago. No introduction needed. Everyone had heard the rumors. Sharp, relentless, purpose-driven. She took the only empty seat at the table, crossed her legs, and looked at Brandon like she was already bored. 10 minutes later, she proved it. When he asked for an assessment of the Q4 campaign rollout, she didn't clear her throat or soften the blow. She went straight in. Meridian has been comfortable with adequate for too long, she said, gaze steady. We're coasting, and coasting is how companies die. A couple executives shifted in their chairs. Brandon's smile froze. I looked up from my notes, and she was looking right at me when she said it. Not accusing, not challenging. More like she recognized another person in the room who wasn't satisfied with the way things were run. After the meeting ended, I expected her to disappear into the HR tour or whatever onboarding circus they had planned. Instead, 20 minutes later, she appeared in my doorway like she'd been directed there. You're Alex Carter, she said, not asked, stated. I leaned back in my chair. Last I checked, I heard you turn down promotions because you don't want to leave Austin. I also heard you challenge Brandon in budget reviews. And supposedly, you're impossible before your second cup of coffee. I stared at her. You did your homework. She shrugged. If I'm working with someone, I like to know what they're made of. There was no flirtation in her tone. No effort to charm. Just direct, efficient curiosity. It hit clean, no games, no politics. We talked shop at first. Projections, bottlenecks, campaign alignment. Then the conversation drifted, naturally, almost accidentally, into books, travel, why most corporate culture is built on pretending everything's fine when everyone knows it's not. Our rhythms matched without effort. She talked fast, thought faster. I analyzed, structured, challenged her ideas in ways she didn't take personally. She liked that. I could see it in the way her eyes sharpened when I disagreed. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Meetings, strategy sessions, late nights at Meridian when the office floor emptied and only the two of us stayed behind. We'd sit across from each other, laptops open, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights. Sometimes we worked in silence. Sometimes we drifted into conversations that had nothing to do with metrics or budgets. She told me about Chicago, why she left, what she wanted to build here, what she refused to tolerate. I told her about Austin, about my family, about the line between ambition and burnout. Nothing romantic happened. Nothing physical. It was all professional on paper. But inside the space between those late nights and early mornings, something shifted, quiet, controlled, deliberate. She wasn't just another colleague. She wasn't noisy. She was a catalyst. And at the time, I mistook that spark for destiny. I didn't know yet that catalysts don't just ignite. They transform. They burn through the weak points. They force change whether you're ready for it or not. Back then, I thought she made my success mean something. I didn't realize she would also be the reason I eventually walked away from all of it. It started on a Thursday, the kind of weeknight where people either go home or push themselves into the city to feel alive for a couple hours. Megan had stayed late again. Both of us finishing work no one asked for, but both of us insisted on doing. When she closed her laptop, she glanced at me with that look she had when she'd already decided something. Have you ever been to the back room? She asked. The back room was a hidden jazz club tucked behind a bookstore off South Congress. No sign, no flashy exterior, just a narrow hallway and a red door that felt like a dare. We ended up walking there, both of us claiming we needed air but neither admitting we didn't want the night to end yet. Inside, everything was low light and brass. A quartet played like they weren't performing for a crowd, just talking to each other through instruments. We got a table in the corner. Not close, not intimate, but the kind of table where you end up leaning in anyway. The conversation didn't start slowly. It dropped straight into the real stuff. Childhood, early jobs, failures, the places we lived before we knew who we were supposed to be. She talked about Chicago winters and a father who demanded perfection. I talked about the first time I felt pride in myself, not from a job, but from fixing my mother's car at 17 and realizing she trusted me with more than she said out loud. We didn't flirt. We didn't touch. It was more dangerous than that. Two people recognizing the same ambition, the same restlessness, the same refusal to accept an average life. I drove her home. She didn't invite me in. She didn't need to. The space between us had already changed. The weeks that followed felt like momentum. Clean, fast, alive. Coffee runs turned into shared lunches. Shared lunches turned into late-night talks. Late-night talks turned into one evening where we both said, almost at the same time, that this thing, whatever it was, felt different. By summer, we moved into a loft overlooking Lady Bird Lake. Exposed brick, tall windows, a kitchen that saw more takeout than cooking. It didn't matter. The place felt like a launch pad. Weekends were motionless. New Orleans for jazz and bad decisions we didn't make. Hill country vineyards. Long drives just to feel the road under us. Weeknights were quieter. Dinners, music, planning, ambition braided between conversations. There was a night I still remember clearly. A storm rolled over the city, hammering the balcony with rain. We stood there anyway, her in my sweatshirt, me holding a glass of whiskey gone warm. She looked at me like she was deciding something. "Promise me," she said, "we won't ever become roommates instead of lovers. Promise we won't disappear into comfort." I didn't think so. I just answered, "I promise." Felt right at the time. Felt solid. That promise would later become a measuring stick. One I didn't realize was being carved that night. Because the cracks didn't show up dramatically. They came quietly, like hairline fractures in concrete. First, it was the hours at work. Her team needed more. My region expanded. We were both chasing excellence, but excellence takes time, and time comes from somewhere. Then came the missed dinners, the tired answers, the conversations pushed to weekends that never lasted long enough. We shrugged it off. Everyone gets busy. Everyone struggles with balance. Everyone thinks it's temporary. And maybe that's why we didn't see it. The tiny moments where we stopped listening as closely, the small hesitations before sharing something vulnerable, the shift from "we'll figure it out" to "we'll talk later." The surface was perfect. The foundation was already bending. But we were in love, and when you're in that phase, you don't question the pace. You don't check for cracks. You run with the momentum and trust it to carry you. If I had known those quiet shifts were the beginning, maybe things would have played out differently. But hindsight is the luxury of a man who survived the fallout. Back then, we were two people caught in a story that felt too good to question. And like every story that burns bright, we didn't notice the smoke until it was already inside the walls. Quarterly planning meetings at Meridian were long, necessary, and predictable. Everyone came armed with polished decks. Brandon brought his buzzwords, and the rest of us tried to keep the machine running. I'd walked through the operations budget with Megan that morning. We aligned it column by column, number by number. She nodded, asked a few sharp questions, then kissed my cheek before heading to her office. So when I stepped into the boardroom, I wasn't worried. I knew my numbers. I knew my plan. And I thought I knew my partner. I started presenting the operations roadmap, clean, efficient, months of planning tightened into a short deck. Halfway through, I shifted to the projections tied to her department. That's when I heard her voice cut across mine. "Alex, did you even read the brief I sent this morning?" The room stopped breathing. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, then toward me. I held my place, finger still on the slide clicker. "Yes," I said evenly. "You and I reviewed this together." She shook her head, loud enough for the room to hear. "These projections are completely out of alignment with marketing's updated strategy. This is..." She gave a short, dismissive laugh. "This is rigid. It's an outdated operational lens." Her tone wasn't professional disagreement. It was ridiculous, public, sharp, deliberate. Brandon cleared his throat like he wanted to intervene but didn't want to get between us. A couple executives looked away, uncomfortable. Someone took a sip of coffee just to have something to do with their hands. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I finished the presentation, skipped the remaining details, and sat down. Megan continued talking, explaining her department's vision like she hadn't spent the morning agreeing with mine. She didn't look at me once. Not after the interruption. Not after the dig. Not once. When the meeting ended, Brandon invited the executive team to lunch downtown. I declined immediately, said I had calls, said I needed to finalize numbers. The truth, I needed distance. I went straight home. The loft felt different, colder, like her voice was still echoing off the walls. The coffee mug she left in the sink looked like it belonged to a stranger. I waited on the balcony until she came home, city lights reflecting off the railing. When the door opened behind me, I didn't turn. "Alex," she started. "Close the door." She did. When I faced her, she looked smaller than she had in that boardroom. She already knew what I was going to say. "I don't care if you disagree with me," I said. "I don't care if you think my projections are wrong. But what you did today wasn't about numbers. It was disrespectful. And you know it." Her eyes watered, but she didn't break. "Brandon's been pressuring me. The campaign performance is tanking." Panicked. I shouldn't have done it in front of everyone. "I'm sorry." I listened to every word, and I accepted the apology because that's who I am. But something in her tone, thin, rushed, defensive, felt like patching a crack with cheap plaster. Cover the surface, ignore the pressure behind it. We sat in silence afterward. She leaned into me. I wrapped an arm around her out of habit more than connection. Over the next weeks, the shift became undeniable. Late nights multiplied. Her phone angled away more often. Conversations shortened. Her laugh changed, became less ours and more distant, reserved for people I didn't know or maybe didn't want to know. We both saw it. We both felt it. And we both pretended we didn't. Because when a fracture starts forming, you convince yourself it's just stress. Just a phase. Just life. You don't call it what it is. The beginning of an ending. The boardroom moment didn't destroy us. It just revealed the weakness in the foundation. A weakness we were about to step directly onto. I came home late on a Wednesday. The apartment was too quiet. Lights dim, like she'd been sitting there rehearsing something. Megan was at the dining table, hands folded, staring at nothing. When she looked up, her face wasn't angry or sad. It was resigned. "We need to take a break," she said. Not a conversation, not a fight, just a statement. I didn't sit. "From what?" "From everything," she said. "From the relationship, the pressure, working together. I just need space." The words were clean, but her eyes weren't. I asked the only question that mattered. "Is there someone else?" She hesitated. "Barely, but I saw it." Then came the denial, too quick, too polished. "No, of course not. I'm just overwhelmed." I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I went to the bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag, and filled it with what I needed for a week. She followed me, voice small, offering explanations that didn't line up. "Alex, I'm not ending things. I just need time." "You've got it," I said, zipping the bag. In the hallway, she reached for my arm. "Are you really leaving?" "Yes." And I walked out. At the hotel that night, the silence hit harder than the distance. The next morning, I put in a formal request to transfer to our Dallas office. Temporary assignment, 6 months. Meridian approved it by noon. Leadership loved mobility. I needed escape. Dallas was a grind. Clean, numbing grind. New team. New projects. New apartment that smelled like fresh paint and nothing else. I filled my nights with workouts, work calls, and meaningless first dates that never made it to second ones. People mistook distraction for healing. I played along. But evenings were the problem. That hour between routine and sleep where the mind has no job except to tell the truth. And the truth was simple. I missed her. Not because she was perfect. She wasn't. Not because things were easy. They weren't. But because walking away didn't erase the history. It just muted it. 6 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice hit me like a memory left on a shelf too long. "Alex, I made a mistake. No theatrics. No manipulation. Just exhaustion." She said the silence had forced her to confront things she'd run from. That life without me felt hollow. That she finally understood what she'd done in the boardroom. in the nights she pulled away, in the moment she asked for that break. She asked to meet halfway between Austin and Dallas. Neutral ground. I agreed because part of me needed to hear the truth straight from her. Not the version I filled in myself. We met at a roadside restaurant. Cheap coffee, fluorescent lights, the kind of place where honesty feels inevitable. She told me about her parents. A broken marriage built on betrayal and emotional dependence. She said she feared ever needing someone the way her mother needed her father. And the closer she got to me, the louder that fear became. It wasn't an excuse. It was context. And context can get inside a man's defenses in ways apologies never do. By the end of the conversation, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was walking back into the fire. We agreed on conditions, honesty, respect, boundaries, a clean second chance. It shouldn't have worked, but for a while it did. And that while was enough to convince me the worst was behind us. What I didn't know was that patterns don't vanish. They wait. When I returned to Austin, it wasn't a dramatic reunion. No big airport moment. No rushing into each other's arms. It was two people who'd gone through hell separately and were trying to see if they still fit together on the other side. We did it differently this time. Separate apartments. Clear boundaries at work. Weekly check-ins that felt more like strategy sessions than romance, but they worked. For a while, it all felt steady. She respected the space. I respected the effort. We stayed in our lanes professionally, collaborated only when we had to, and built the relationship slowly instead of sprinting into it like before. 6 months in, the foundation felt solid enough that I started planning the next step. Not because I was desperate for permanence, but because she'd earned it back piece by piece. That's when the house came into the picture. A craftsman-style place on the edge of the city. Porch columns, old oak tree in the yard, wide windows that made the mornings look cleaner. I bought it quietly, picked up extra consulting work, cut every unnecessary expense. I wanted the place to be ours, not just mine. The day I showed it to her, she walked through the empty rooms slowly and reverently, touching door frames, looking at the backyard like she could already picture the future we'd talked about. When we stepped outside, I dropped to one knee with an emerald-cut ring that matched her eyes. She cried, not dramatic, not showy, just a woman overwhelmed. Her yes was immediate. We moved into the house within weeks. The place is filled with new furniture, wedding planning spreadsheets, paint samples, arguments about appliances, jokes about future kids. Felt like a redemption arc. A second story built with better materials. And for a while it was good. But hindsight makes the signs obvious. She grew quieter on the drive home some nights. She turned her phone slightly away, not enough to be suspicious, just enough to be intentional. She talked about a new software architect, Ethan Blake. Smart, driven, great to collaborate with. I didn't pry. I trusted the process we rebuilt. But trust doesn't prevent patterns. It just makes their return hit harder. The night it came to a head was a Tuesday, cold, calm, nothing special. We were eating dinner, something simple, and she barely touched her food. Her eyes kept drifting, not out of distraction, but out of conflict. Finally, she set her fork down. Alex, I need a pause. No emotion, just resignation. I didn't blink. A pause from what? From the wedding, from planning, from all the pressure. She took a breath. I just need to think. I asked the same question I asked the first time. Is there someone else? This time she didn't hesitate. There's someone I have feelings for. Not love, not an affair. Feelings. She said it like she was sparing me something. Ethan? I asked. She looked at her lap. Nothing happened. I just look forward to seeing him. And that scares me. The rage didn't come hot. Came cold, crystal clear. The kind of clarity that doesn't need volume. I reached into the drawer and took out the deed. Already in both our names. Already tied together legally in ways we hadn't fully discussed. I said it in front of her. I'm not your safety net, I said. Not this time. Her face broke. Not into tears, but into realization. The same realization she'd had years earlier when she asked for a break. She thought history would repeat. She thought I'd wait. She thought I'd bend. But patterns don't just belong to the people who hurt you. Sometimes the pattern you break is your own. I stood, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the room. She didn't follow. Maybe she knew she couldn't fix it. Maybe she knew it wasn't supposed to be fixed. Either way, that was the night the second chance ended. And when a second chance dies, it stays dead. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't rage. I didn't spiral. I packed a small bag, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the dining table while the sun pushed over the horizon. The house was silent except for Megan moving around the bedroom. Soft steps, occasional choked breaths. The sound of someone finally realizing the consequence wasn't negotiable. By 8 a.m., my decision was done. Transfer request submitted. The Denver Regional Launch Team contacted. Flights checked. Lease options bookmarked. Movement is a mercy. Decisions are oxygen. A man who knows what he won't tolerate never suffocates. By noon, Denver leadership called and said they wanted me immediately, 2 weeks earlier than the original schedule. I accepted before they finished the sentence. I waited until evening to talk to her. The house looked wrong in the soft light, like it was already someone else's home. She stood in the kitchen, hugging her arms like she was cold. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said. Her throat bobbed. "For how long?" "Permanently. We'll put the house on the market. Split the equity. I'll have the paperwork started next week." She backed against the counter like she needed something solid behind her. "Alex, please. I didn't do anything. I just needed. You needed to see if there was someone better," I said calmly. "And you wanted me waiting while you explored your options. I don't do that." Her eyes filled. Not dramatic, just shock and grief mixing into something heavy. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "This is clarity." I placed the engagement ring and my house key on the counter. Same words as before, because truth doesn't need revisions. When you finally understand what you've lost, it'll be too late. This time she broke, voice cracking, body shaking. But I didn't stay. I wasn't comfort. I didn't negotiate. I walked out, closed the door, didn't look back. Denver was clean, cold, quiet, exactly what I needed. Long hours at the new office, evenings at the climbing gym, weekends exploring the foothills with no one asking where I was or why. I rented a small apartment downtown, not stylish, not symbolic, just mine, a clean slate. For the first time in years, the silence felt like peace instead of punishment. I made new colleagues, Jake Reynolds, operations lead, sharp, sarcastic, good enough company that the workdays didn't feel like isolation. We grabbed beers after long shifts, talked shop, talked about life. He didn't know a single thing about my past until I chose to tell him. It was a good stretch, a solid one. Then Megan broke the distance. At first it was emails, long paragraphs, apologies, explanations, promises. I ignored them. Then the calls. Dozens. I blocked the number. Then she found the coffee shop I went to every morning. Then the climbing gym. Then she reached out to my mother. That was the line. When she appeared in the parking lot of my gym, eyes wild from lack of sleep, words tumbling out like she was trying to outrun her own regret. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I spoke steady and firm. "Megan, if you contact me again, in any way, I will file a restraining order." She froze. She thought I was bluffing. She'd mistaken kindness for softness too many times. When she reached out to my family again 2 days later, I followed through. Filed the paperwork. Got the temporary order approved. Delivered through the proper channels with no theatrics. She left Denver within a week. People talk about restraining orders like they're a weapon. They're not. They're a shield. The first time I held a boundary she couldn't cross. Not revenge. Not anger. Survival. And survival, I learned, has nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do with choosing yourself. It was a Thursday, the kind that moves slow, the office humming with quiet productivity. I was finishing a logistics proposal when Jake stepped inside, dropped into the chair across from me, and raised his eyebrows with that look that meant trouble had found someone. "You remember Megan Scott, right?" he asked. I didn't flinch. "What about her?" He exhaled. "She got fired. Public meltdown with that architect guy, Ethan. Whole marketing team saw it. I didn't react the way he expected. No surprise, no anger, no satisfaction. Just a steady breath and a quiet, "Tell me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. During a presentation, she called him manipulative, said he'd led her on, screwed with her head, sabotaged her work. In front of the entire department. I didn't smile. I didn't wince. I just listened. Jake continued. HR launched an investigation. Turns out Ethan has a history. Multiple women, same pattern. Flirting, late nights, emotional pull, then dropping them. He's been warned twice before. I nodded once. Not in judgment, just in recognition. Jake watched me for a reaction I didn't give. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." And I was. That was the part that surprised me. He kept going. "She burned bridges with Brandon. Lost her condo. Word is she moved back to her parents' place in Houston." I leaned back, staring at the mountains outside my window. The sun had dropped low enough to cast the whole city in amber light. I felt complicated. Not vindicated. Not triumphant. Just aware. Aware that the pattern didn't stop with me. Aware that the spiral wasn't personal. It was hers long before it ever reached my doorstep. Aware that I'd stepped out of something that would have kept taking until I had nothing left. Jake stood, clapped my shoulder. "Just thought you should know." When he left, I sat there for a long time, watching the sky turn from gold to blue. My mind didn't replay old arguments or what-ifs. It drifted somewhere quieter. To the girl I first met in that glass conference room. To the woman who stood in my kitchen twisting an engagement ring because she didn't know how to handle wanting two futures at once. To the person who kept running from herself and calling it space. I didn't reach out. I didn't draft a text or an email. That chapter was closed. But I wasn't stone either. So that night I wrote a short message, not to her but to her parents. I told them I was sorry to hear she was going through a difficult time, that I hoped she found the support she needed, that I wished for her healing and clarity. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't leave a number, didn't offer to be a part of anything. Just respect, clean and final. They wrote back a week later, thankful, surprised, kind. I didn't reply. It wasn't a dialogue. It was a boundary with compassion on both sides. And with that last small gesture, something inside me settled. Not closure in the storybook sense. Not some grand final conversation. Just the realization that the pattern didn't break me. It broke her. And leaving, truly leaving, was the first decision that led me toward a life that didn't revolve around fixing someone else's chaos. A life where peace wasn't temporary. A life where I wasn't bracing for the next crack. They say closure comes when the chapter ends. But the truth is simpler. Closure comes when you no longer need the chapter to make sense. My life settled into something simple after everything with Megan ended. Not empty, simple. The Denver foothills have a way of stripping a man down to who he actually is, not who he's pretending to be. I bought a small cabin up there a year after the move. With stove, quiet mornings, the kind of silence that feels like a reset button instead of a punishment. That's when I adopted Duke. A 90-pound rescue mutt with a busted ear, a stubborn streak, and a loyalty that didn't waver for a second. We became a pair faster than I expected. Mornings were hikes. Nights were shared meals, mostly me eating and Duke judging my cooking. The animal shelter became my weekend spot. Not because I needed something to fill the time, but because it felt right to give something back to something that had steadied me. That's where I met Sarah Mitchell. A veterinarian with brown hair always pulled into a loose knot, sleeves rolled up, hands steady no matter what animal she was working with. She wasn't loud. She didn't walk into a room like she owned it. She moved with a calm that made everyone else settle without trying. We talked because Duke wouldn't leave her alone. She laughed, scratched behind his broken ear, and said, "He's picky." That's a compliment. Our connection didn't start with sparks. Started with conversations, slow, grounded, effortless. Coffee after volunteer shifts. Car rides to grab lunch. Then a snowstorm that stranded us at the shelter overnight. No drama, no tension, Just two people talking by a small propane heater while the world outside went quiet. I told her about my past. Not the dramatic version, the honest one. The engagement, the emotional betrayal, the restraining order, the parts men usually bury. She didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She just listened, nodded and said, "You kept your boundaries. That's not something to apologize for." She told me her own story. A marriage in her 20s that slowly squeezed the air out of her. A man who needed control more than partnership. She left before she lost herself completely. We understood each other without needing the other to fill anything missing. Our relationship grew slow on purpose. Hikes, shelter shifts, family dinners, quiet nights cooking together. Nothing grand. Everything is real. A year later, I proposed in the simplest way possible. It was a quiet morning in the kitchen. Snow outside, coffee brewing, Duke asleep at our feet. I slid a ring across the table, no speech, no choreography, just intention. She looked at me, steady as always, and said one word. Yes. Not a maybe, not a hesitation, not a request for space. Just yes. We married at the cabin. A small ceremony, 20 people, nothing extravagant. The mountains didn't care. Duke barked through half the vows, and it felt like the first moment in a long time where nothing was fragile. A month later, I got a short email from Megan. It wasn't dramatic. No apologies. No requests. Just, congratulations. I hope you're happy. I mean that. I read it once. Closed it. Didn't reply. Not out of anger, out of respect. Sometimes silence is the cleanest boundary you can draw. That night, Sarah and I got ready for bed, talking about weekend plans and whether we should adopt a second dog. The cabin was quiet, warm, safe. And as I laid down, I realized something that had taken years to understand. Leaving Megan wasn't the end of a love story. It was the beginning of self-respect. And everything good in my life now grew from that one decision.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.